same-sex marriage. Now you're for it. You defended President Obama's immigration policies. Now you say they're too harsh. You supported his trade deal dozens of times. You even called it the gold standard. Now suddenly last week you're against it. Will you say anything to get elected?
Well, actually, I have been very consistent over the course of my entire life. I have always fought for the same values and principles.
Crazy people commenting, and so here this guy's put up something saying war is bad. Oh, gee. It's a real shock, huh? Oh, war is bad. War is wasteful. War is expensive. War is ridiculous. Just assholes being assholes. That's all a war is. Anyway, he kind of says that. And then you get a whole bunch of, well, not a whole bunch, but a few people. And then I post my Democratic Party news on here, and Ari gets upset. He says, stop spamming my posts. So I say it's not spam, and it's not spam. One comment on your irrelevant, kind of pointless post isn't really spam. So I say I'm not spam, but yeah, I'll stop alerting you to my awesomeness. And then right underneath I see this guy Patrick Mc whatever, he's a Mick of some kind, saying without war we would be a colony speaking German, worshipping Islam, and slavery would be legal. So he's saying that the Germans would have won, the Muslims would have won, and that the South would have won. And it always cracks me up when these people play devil's advocates, and then they really back what they say. I mean, I guess some of them actually mean it. And so I'm like, well, how's that possible? Without war, Germans couldn't have possibly won World War II. You didn't think about that, did you? Laugh a lot. I say, without war, no one would have to defend themselves. So I'm stating the obvious, right? I mean, it's just a basic fact. But no, Patrick won't leave it there. He says, when you walk into a country and get no resistance, you just take over, equals no war. What the fuck is he talking about? I say, Patrick, what are you, a moron? Walking into a country and taking over is war. No shit. I mean, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And well, no. I'm on the internet. That couldn't possibly be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But anyway, I say if no one did it, then there would be no war. Hence, no need to defend yourself. And if you don't want people to call you a moron, then stop being one. And he actually replies directly to me, says, fuck you. Oh, well, that's a brilliant response, huh? So I blocked him and wrote, question mark, and then poor Patrick can't understand simple logic and can't admit when he's wrong. You know, I think if you watch this show, you'll know that I think it's a blessing and nothing to do with God. I just mean blessing as in something good happens to you. I think it's a blessing when, especially for me personally, if somebody proves me wrong. I mean, I don't want them just saying I'm wrong. They always do that. Just, well, you're wrong. Well, you're wrong. But they don't actually say why I'm wrong. But it's a blessing when they do. When they explain to me how I'm wrong. Because at that point, all of a sudden, I'm just such a better person. Because I'm like, wow, now I know I'm wrong about that. Now I have correct information, right? Now I can make better arguments and fight the fight better, and or if it's a personal thing, fight my personal life. We're always fighting to make sure we're the best possible people we can be. At least I am, and I know a lot of people out there are. So it's a blessing when somebody.
Do you think New York State should recognize gay marriage?
No.
No. Okay.
I believe that marriage is not just a bond, but a sacred bond between a man and a woman.
I have not supported same-sex marriage. I've supported civil partnerships and contractual relationships.
I support marriage for lesbian and gay couples. I support it personally and as a matter of policy and law.
So you're saying your opinion on gay marriage changed, or you changed your mind?
I have to say, I think you are being very persistent, but you are playing with my words and playing with what is such an
I'm just trying to clarify
issue.
so I can understand.
No, I don't think you are trying to clarify. I think you're trying to say that, I used to be opposed and now I'm in favor and I did it for political reasons, and that's just flat wrong. So let me just state what I feel like you are implying and repudiate it. I have a strong record. I have a great commitment to this issue, and I am proud of what I've done and the progress we're making.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify what I was saying. No, I was saying that you maybe really believe this all along, but, believe in gay marriage all along, but felt for political reasons America wasn't ready yet and you couldn't say it. That's what I was thinking.
No, that is not true.
It really is great how long you've supported gay marriage.
Yes.
I could have supported it sooner.
Well, you did it pretty soon.
Could have been sooner.
Fair point.
Help dismantle the Democratic Party.
Well, this is a story. It sort of stunned me that you were interested in it, because I've been working on aspects of the story for over 20 years and nobody's been interested. But if you go back all the way to 1988, there was a group that was formed called the Democratic Leadership Council.
This was Al Frahn's group, right? Al Frahn and Bill
Yeah,
Clinton.
right. And the idea was to move the Democratic Party to the right. And it worked with people like, at the same time, Pamela Harriman was having over nearly 100 meetings with people who paid $1,000 a head to come to them to discuss who the candidate should be in 1992. And she raised about $12 million. But meanwhile, the Democratic Leadership Council...
Okay, so Pamela Harriman is no doubt
House of Commons. Their son Winston was born. Shortly after giving birth, Pamela and the newborn were photographed by Cecil Beaton for Life magazine, its first cover of the mother with baby. In February 1941, Randolph was sent to Cairo for military service, where he accrued large gambling debts. His letter to Pamela asking her to make good on his liabilities, along with her affair with W. Aberle Harriman, combined to shatter their marriage. But the fault probably lay on both sides. Harriman was known at Chequers by the French phrase habitué de la maison for his frequent stays there in 1941. Harriman was one of the aristocratic set from the U.S. Embassy, charming, suave and sophisticated. They had developed a friendship during the London Blitz, so that by April 17, 1941 they were already close and intimate friends. Jack Colville, Churchill's private secretary, was well aware of the affair. but their clandestine relationship had to wait 30 years before consummation in marriage. She completed the circle by becoming a U.S. citizen. Her father-in-law, however, was too busy visiting bombed-out Blitz sites to be overly concerned in 1941. During 1944 she worked in the cabinet's war rooms on a secretive mission for Operation Bodyguard, working with Robert E. Sherwood. "The days at the office were very sorry," wrote Bobby Bevan, a spy who was directly involved with Bodyguard's activities. "Long days stretched into lonely nights. Then they frequently indulged the senses on champagne and Russian caviar." Bodyguard went ahead without Allied knowledge or approval, which upset the Soviets. At a critical point prior to the top-secret D-Day Normandy landings, Allied intelligence feared Germany's strength in the Mediterranean. A diversionary attack on the Balkans was designed to distract the Nazis in France. This further encouraged Churchill to switch sides to Tito's partisans. After the war, Randolph had an affair with Bevan's wife. Eventually, Pamela filed for divorce in December 1945 on the grounds that Randolph had deserted her for 3 years. Later, after having converted to Catholicism, she obtained an annulment from the Catholic Church. Romantic involvements and affairs. Beside 2 additional marriages, Pamela Harriman had numerous affairs with men of prominence and wealth. During her marriage to Randolph Churchill, she had romantic involvements with men such as W. Averell Harriman, who much later became her 3rd husband, Edward Armborough, and John Hayjock Whitney. Notable consorts after her divorce included Prince Ali Khan, Alfonso de Portugal, Johnny Agnelli, and Baron Ellie de Rothschild. Churchill became well known for her attention to detail with men. When involved romantically with a man, she paid extremely close attention to his desires, his preferences, and went to any lengths necessary to satisfy his needs during the affair. William S. Paley, briefly a consort during the war, said, "She is the greatest courtesan of the century," meaning it more as a compliment than a detraction. The more critical Max Hastings said, acervically, she was described as having become a world expert on rich men's bedroom ceilings. After her divorce from Randolph Churchill, she moved to Paris and in 1948 began her 5-year-long affair with Johnny Agnelli. She described this as the happiest period of her life. Agnelli, however, was not faithful in this relationship. In 1952, Pamela found him with a young woman, Anne-Marie de Sticanville, and complained strongly about this, despite her own past behavior. Agnelli sustained a severe leg injury in a car accident while bringing de Sticanville home. Pamela nursed him through his injury, and later became pregnant, although it was never confirmed that this was by Agnelli, but had an abortion in Switzerland. Later, Princess Mirella Caracciolo di Castagneto became pregnant by Agnelli, and Pamela Churchill ended the affair. Her next significant relationship was with Baron Ellie de Rothschild, who was married. He supported her financially, and she was schooled in art history and winemaking during this clandestine and short relationship. During this time she also entertained an affair with the writer Maurice Drown and with the shipping magnate Stavros Niarchos. Marriage to Leland Hayward in 1959, she met Broadway producer Leland Hayward, who was still married to Slim Hawkes. He proposed to her, and after her marriage ultimatum to Rothschild was rejected, she accepted Hayward's offer and moved to New York City. The day Hayward's divorce was final, she became the fifth Mrs. Hayward, with the ceremony taking place in Carson City, Nevada, on May 4, 1960. Hayward was rich with income from his productions, notably the very successful The Sound of Music, allowing for a lavish and luxurious lifestyle mostly between their residence in New York City and the Westchester County estate Haywire. Haywire also became the name of the bitter memoirs of her stepdaughter Brooke Hayward. Pamela Hayward stayed with her husband until his death on March 18, 1971. Marriage to W. Averell Harriman. The day after Hayward's funeral, Pamela arranged to resume her acquaintance with her former lover W. Averell Harriman, then 79 years old and recently widowed. They were married on September 27, 1971. Was this marriage? Her social focus was moved to Washington, D.C., where he owned the townhouse in Georgetown from which they entertained many notable persons. Harriman, the railroad heir, was wealthy and also bought an estate in Virginia and a private jet. With Harriman's involvement handlings in the Democratic Party, her political career began. Her last marriage lasted until his death in 1986. In later years, she had significant legal problems with Harriman's children concerning the inheritance. Harriman served on the Rockefeller University Council from 1977 to 1979, and on the Board of Trustees from 1979 to 1993. Political life. As Pamela Churchill Harriman, she became a United States citizen in 1971 and became involved with the Democratic Party, creating a fundraising system, a political action committee named Democrats for the 80s, later Democrats for the 90s, and nicknamed PAMPAC. In 1980, the National Women's Democratic Club named her Woman of the Year. U.S. President Bill Clinton appointed her United States Ambassador to France in 1993. The Dayton Agreement was signed in Paris in 1995 while she served as ambassador. Pamela Harriman died on February 5, 1997 at the American Hospital, Nutty Lee Suter Seine, after suffering a cerebral hemorrhage while swimming at the Paris Reeds one day earlier. The morning after her death, President Jacques Chirac of France placed the Grand Cross of the Légion d'honneur on her flag-draped coffin. She was the first female foreign diplomat to receive this honor. President Clinton, in further recognition of her contributions and significance, dispatched Air Force One to return her body to the United States and spoke movingly at her funeral at the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., mentioning her public service in glowing terms. She was buried February 14, 1997 at Arden, the former Harriman estate in New York.
Okay, so my point is that politics has been swimming with money. You know, we the people, we have no organized, you know, it's so hard to describe because it doesn't exist. Well, we'll compare it to their side, to their, you know, they have been organizing. You know, they aren't millions of people. They're just the 0.1% or whatever. But when you listen to this about this woman, Pamela Harriman, who was I mean, she raised tons of money and therefore had tons of power, or at least the people who gave her money had lots of power over the Democratic Party. And even the people who didn't give her money, you know, they, at some point, they don't even have to give money anymore. You know, they just wield power like a magic wand. They use other people's money. I mean, the thing that so sickened me so often when I was researching this stuff was how much of what they did was funded by our taxpayer dollars. I mean, they were really good at grabbing up our money and using it to empower themselves. I mean, that's just mind-blowing, right? But what gets me is that well, it's always been like this. It's like these evil is like a poison that runs through the veins of our body. Like if the world were a body, and the evil in this case, the Harrimans, the Bushes, you know, they're all connected. They're all hooked together. And I'll go back to like Harriman Bush. So she was in with a Rothschild, and she was in with a Harriman, and she was in with just all these same, I mean, the same names just keep on popping up and up and up. When I look, the first thing that I did that really got me excited politically was my study of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, so many of the people who I had been familiarized with through the news and stuff growing up just kept on popping up, all these people. You know, whether it was Ford or Warren or all these people, all through history, all through my time being alive, just seeing these names pop up all the time. And then I come to find out that they were all in the Warren Commission, or they were all, you know, the Dulleses and all this stuff, just all connected together. And like I say, she's at a nexus, and here she is creating, or at least heavily funding, through her fundraising, the overthrow of the Democratic Party. I mean, that's what I'm talking about here mainly, is the overthrow of the Democratic Party, them forming groups to fund a conservative overthrow. And when we find out who they are, they're conservatives. I mean, they can act as whatever they want, just like Hillary Clinton can act like she's not a conservative all day long, but in the end, where does she get all her money? You know, and the whole movement that led to the Clintons and then to Obama, the whole movement, this Democratic Leadership Council, was all paid for by conservatives. And they openly admitted that they were wanting to move the Democratic Party to the right. I didn't want to be moved to the right. And you can't move me to the right. All you do is disenfranchise me. You take away my party. You make me ashamed to say I'm a Democrat. So, shit. So much of this is so hard to put into words. Let's listen to this guy a bit again now.
Was working on aspects of how you make the Democratic Party more conservative. And what I didn't learn until earlier this year was that one of the people who had helped fund it in the early period was Koch Industries with the Koch brothers. And this sort of stunned me because while I expected some of the more conservative businesses that did both sides to do it, I thought that the Koch brothers were pretty firmly in the Republican camp. So that was sort of
I think they'll go wherever they can buy a politician, won't they?
That's right. I think that's true. I think I had underestimated their willingness to buy people.
Yeah. So the Democratic Leadership Council, this was, my understanding of it is that this thing was created in the late Reagan years, 87, 88.
Yeah.
That Al Fromm played a major role in it, at least according to his own book.
Democratic Leadership Council Wiki. The Democratic Leadership Council (DLZ) was a non-profit 501c4 corporation founded in 1985 that, upon its formation, argued the United States Democratic Party should shift away from the leftward turn it took in the late 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. One of its main purposes was to win back white middle-class voters with ideas that addressed their concerns. The DLC hailed President Bill Clinton as proof of the viability of third-way politicians and as a DLC success story. The DLC's affiliated think tank is the Progressive Policy Institute. Democrats who adhere to the DLC's philosophy often call themselves New Democrats. This term is also used by other groups who have similar views on where the party should go in the future, like NDN and Third Way. On February 7, 2011, Politico reported that the DLZ would dissolve, and would do so as early as the following week. On July 5 of that year, the LC founder Al Fromm announced in a statement on the organization's website that the historical records of the DLC have been purchased by the Clinton Foundation. The DLC's last chairman was former Representative Harold Ford of Tennessee, and its vice chair was Senator Thomas R. Harper of Delaware. Its CEO was Bruce Reed. Contents: 1. Founding and early history. 2. Positions. 2.1 2003 Invasion of Iraq. 3. Criticism for electoral and political success. 5. 2004 Presidential primary. 6. 2008 Presidential primary. 7. Chairs. 8. Republican equivalent. 9. See also 10. References. 11. External links. Founding and early history. The DLZ was founded by Al Fromm in 1985 in the wake of Democratic candidate and former Vice President Walter Mondale's landslide defeat by incumbent President Ronald Reagan in the 1984 presidential election. Other founders include Democratic Governors Chuck Robb, Virginia; Bruce Babbitt, Arizona; and Lawton Chiles, Florida; Senator Sam Nunn, Georgia; and Representative Dick Jefford, Missouri. The model on which the Democratic Leadership Council was built was the Coalition for a Democratic Majority, founded by Scoop Jackson Democrats in response to George McGovern's massive loss to Richard Nixon in 1972. The CRM was dismayed by 2 presidential election losses, and the organization's goal was to steer the party away from the new left influence that had permeated the Democratic Party since the late 1960s and back to the policies that made the FDR coalition electorally successful for close to 40 years. Although Senator Jackson declined to endorse the organization, believing the timing was inappropriate, future DLC founders and early members were involved, such as Senator Sam Nunn and Senator Charles S. Robb. In the early 1980s, some of the youngest members of Congress, including Representative William Gray of Pennsylvania, Tim Worth of Colorado, Al Gore of Tennessee, Richard Jefford of Missouri, and Gillis Long of Louisiana, helped found the House Democratic Caucus Committee on Party Effectiveness. Formed by Long and his allies after the 1980 presidential election, The CPE hoped to become the main vehicle for the rejuvenation of the Democratic Party. The CPE has been called the first organizational embodiment of the New Democrats. The DLZ started as a group of 43 elected officials and two staffers, all from Will Marshall, and shared their predecessor's goal of reclaiming the Democratic Party from the left's influence prevalent since the late 1960s. Their original focus was to secure the 1988 presidential nomination of a Southern conservative Democrat such as Nunn or Robb. After the success of Jesse Jackson, the vocal critic of the DLZ, in winning a number of Southern states in 1988's Super Tuesday primary, the group began to shift its focus towards influencing public debate. In 1989, Marshall founded the Progressive Policy Institute, a think tank which has since turned out policy blueprints for the DLZ. Its most extensive series of papers is the series of New Economy Policy Reports. Positions. It is the opinion of the DLZ that economic populism is not politically viable, citing the defeated presidential campaigns of Senator George McGovern in 1972 and Vice President Walter Mondale in 1984. The DLZ states that it seeks to define and galvanize popular support for a new public philosophy built on progressive ideals, mainstream values, and innovative, non-bureaucratic, market-based solutions. The DLZ has supported welfare reform, such as the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. President Clinton's expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, and the creation of AmeriCorps. The DLZ supports expanded health insurance via tax credits for the uninsured and opposes plans for single-payer universal health care. The DLZ supports universal access to preschool, charter schools, and measures to allow a greater degree of choice in schooling though not school vouchers, and supports the No Child Left Behind Act. The DLZ supports both the North American Free Trade Agreement NAFTA and the Central America Free Trade Agreement CAFTA. The DLZ has both supported and criticized the policies of President George W. Bush. The DLZ opposed the partial birth abortion ban, the expiration of the 1994 assault weapon ban, the Clear Skies Initiative, and what they perceived as a lack of funding of the Community-Oriented Policing Services COPS program. In 2001, the DLZ endorsed the idea of tax cuts for the middle class, but opposed the Bush tax cut since it favored the wealthy and was perceived by the DLZ as fiscally irresponsible. The organization supports some forms of Social Security privatization but opposes financing private retirement accounts with large amounts of borrowed money. In 2006, the DLZ also urged Senate Democrats to vote against Bush's nomination of Samuel Alito to the U.S. Supreme Court on principle but firmly opposed any filibuster of the nominee. 2003 invasion of Iraq. The DLZ gave strong support for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Prior to the war, Marshall Whitman, Senator Jolie Bergman's press secretary and a senior fellow with Will Marshall's DLZ-affiliated Progressive Policy Institute think tank, co-signed a letter to President Bush from the Project for the New American Century endorsing military action against Saddam Hussein. During the 2004 primary campaign, Whitman attacked presidential candidate Howard Dean as an out-of-touch liberal because of Dean's anti-war stance. Whitman dismissed other critics of the Iraq invasion such as filmmaker Michael Moore as members of the loony left. even as domestic support for the Iraq War plummeted in 2004 and 2005. The LC co-founder Will Marshall called upon Democrats to balance their criticism of Bush's handling of the Iraq War with praise for the president's achievements and cautioned Democrats need to be choosier about the political company they keep. Distancing themselves from the pacifist and anti-American fringe criticism that the LZ has become unpopular within many progressive and liberal political circles such as the organization's Center for American Progress, Democracy for America, and the Bloc might. Some critics claimed the strategy of triangulation between the political left and right to gain broad appeal is fundamentally flawed. In the long run, so opponents say, this strategy has resulted in concession after concession to the opposition and promotion of a free market economic agenda favorable to corporations and entrepreneurs, including those seeking to privatize public services, while alienating traditionally allied voters and working-class people. Other critics cite that the low turnout of organized labor in the 1994 election after Bill Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement into law resulted in the Republican Party gaining the majority in the 1994 House of Representatives elections and 1994 Senate elections that would last for 12 years until 2006. Author and columnist David Sirota has strongly criticized the LZ, who he claims have sold out to corporate interests. In 1980, the Democratic National Committee (DNC) founded the Democratic Business Council to compete with the Republican National Committee for donations from businesses and corporations. Sirota has also argued that the term centrist is a misnomer in that these politicians are out of touch with public opinion. Sirota's article "The Democrats' Da Vinci Code" argues that truly progressive politicians are more successful in so-called red states than the mainstream media have previously reported. Others contend that the DLC's distaste for what they refer to as economic class warfare has allowed the language of populism to be monopolized by the right wing. Many argue that the Democrats' abandonment of populism to the right wing, shifting the form of that populism from the economic realm to the culture wars, has been critical for Republican dominance of Middle America. See, for instance, Thomas Frank's "What's the Matter with Kansas?" Still other critics believe that the LZ has essentially become an influential corporate and right-wing implant in the Democratic Party. Marshall Whitman, the former senior fellow at the DLZ, former legislative director for the Christian Coalition, and former communications director for Republican Senator John McCain, and Will Marshall, the vocal supporter of the war in Iraq, are among those associated with the LZ who have right-wing credentials. Finally, detractors of the DLC note that the DLC has received funding from the right-wing Bradley Foundation as well as from oil companies, military contractors, and various Fortune 500 companies. However, the DNC proper has also benefited from funding by corporations like these via the Democratic Business Council. The electoral and political success. A Gallup poll of Democratic National Committee members in February 2005 showed that, by more than 2 to 1, 52 to 23%, the DNC members wanted the party to become more moderate, rather than more liberal. That view was shared by Democrats nationally. In a January 2005 survey, Gallup found that 59% of Democrats wanted the party to take a more moderate course. Although progressive critics argue that the LC's centrism has led the Democratic Party to multiple electoral defeats, The LC candidates, office holders, and their moderate policies have been generally favored by the American electorate. When the Democratic Party won majority status in the Senate in 1986, it was done with centrist and the LZ-affiliated candidates. Barbara Mikulski, a participant in the LC's National Service Tour, Harry Reid, who recently said Democrats have to swallow their pride and move toward the middle, conservative Democrat Richard Shelby, the LCer Bob Graham, the LCer Ken Conrad, and the LCer Tom Dashley. When Bill Clinton, former chairman of the LZ, made up his mind to run for the presidency in 1992, the LZ spotted the right candidate to promote its mission. Bill Clinton ran his 1992 and 1996 campaigns as a New Democrat, and prior to Obama's 2012 presidential re-election became the only twice-elected Democratic president since President Franklin D. Roosevelt. New Democrats made significant gains in both the 2006 midterms and the 2008 elections, while explicitly denying any direct connection to the LZ in 2003. In May 2009, President Obama reportedly declared to the House New Democrat coalition, "I am a New Democrat." Some political analysts like Kenneth Batter contend the LZ embodies the spirit of Truman Kennedy-era Democrats and were vital to the Democratic Party's resurgence after the election losses of liberals George McGovern, Walter Mondale, and Michael Dukakis. Simon Rosenberg, a longtime Democratic campaign operative and strategist, said recently, "There is a strong argument to be made that the LZ has been the most influential think tank in American politics over the past generation." The LC helped set in motion a period of party modernization that has helped the Democratic Party overcome the potent and ultimately ruinous rise of the new right. 2000 for presidential primary. In May 2003, as the Democratic primary of the 2000 for presidential campaign was starting to pick up, the organization voiced concern that the Democratic contenders might be taking positions too far left of the mainstream general electorate. Early front-runner Howard Dean, who attracted popular support due in large part to his anti-war views despite his reputation as a centrist governor of Vermont, was specifically criticized by the LC founder and CEO Alfram's criticism of Dean was also likely due to the former governor's opposition to the Iraq War, which most party centrists, including Fram, endorsed. Dean's claimed to hail from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. The phrase, originally used by Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota, has been interpreted by some as subtle criticism of the LZ and the New Democrats in general. Indeed, Dean once described the LZ as the Republican wing of the Democratic Party. The LC countered that Dean represented the McGovern-Mondale wing of the Democratic Party, defined principally by weakness abroad and elitist, interest group liberalism at home. Senator John Kerry won the Democratic primary and chose primary contender Senator John Edwards as his running mate. Both senators were members of the Senate New Democrat coalition, and the LZ anticipated that they would win the general election. In a March 3, 2004 dispatch, they suggested voters would appreciate Kerry's centrist viewpoints, imagining voters to say, "If this is a waffle, bring on the syrup." 2008 presidential primary. The 2008 Democratic primary pitted New York Senator Hillary Clinton, a prominent LC member, against Illinois Senator Barack Obama, who had previously stated that his positions on NAFTA, The Iraq War and universal health care made him an unlikely candidate for membership in the DLZ. However, President Obama has since surrounded himself with DLZ members, appointing Clinton herself as Secretary of State. In May 2009, President Obama reportedly declared to the House New Democrat coalition, the congressional arm of the DLZ, "I am a New Democrat." President Obama has also called himself a progressive, in addition to being endorsed by Howard Dean's Progressive Political Action Committee Democracy for America. Joe Lieberman, another notable member of the DLZ, endorsed Republican Senator John McCain for the presidency in 2008, citing his agreement with McCain's stance on the war on terrorism as the primary reason for his support. Later in the campaign, Lieberman was mentioned as a possible vice presidential nominee for John McCain's ticket. However, Lieberman denied any interest in this role, and Alaska Governor Sarah Palin was ultimately selected to be McCain's running mate. Chairs Representative Dick Jefford of Missouri 1985 to 1986, Governor Chuck Robb of Virginia 1986 to 1988, Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia 1988 to 1990, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas 1990 to 1991, Senator John Breaux of Louisiana 1991 to 1993, Representative Dave McCurdy of Oklahoma 1993 to 1995, Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut 1995 to 2001, Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana 2001 to 2005, Governor Tom Vilsack of Iowa 2005 to 2007, FMR Representative Harold Ford of Tennessee 2007 to 2011. Titles listed are those held at time of assuming chair. Republican equivalent on the Republican side of the aisle. Another centrist organization was founded by moderate and some left-of-center Republicans with the same purpose for the Republican Party. The Republican Leadership Council was founded by former New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman and former Missouri Senator and Episcopal priest John Danforth.
That basically it was, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding, and I have not yet finished reading Al Fromm's book, so I'm just only kind of halfway into this, but that basically they were saying, the labor unions, which were, a quarter to a third of the American workforce when Reagan came into office, just 8 years later had been, decimated. They're down to, they're from 25% of our workforce down to 7% now.
Right.
So there was no longer a reliable source of money for Democratic candidates. And so...
Okay, so what I'm seeing here is, as soon as these people got this thing started, all these conservatives just jumped on it, right? Oh, here's a chance to overthrow the Democratic Party, and you can't make it just go away, right? Because then all there would be a Republican running for whatever, right? So you can't do that. So you got to have a Democratic Party, but you don't want it to be the best way to win a game of chess or checkers or whatever is if you're playing on both sides, and the people are all the pawns down there on the board, and you're really the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's why we call it the establishment, because it's the same people, maybe not at the lower levels, but at the higher levels on both sides.
And one of the problems was that this is sort of an early period. We now understand the incredible influence that industrial and corporate money has on our campaigns. But at the time, we didn't really. I remember giving a talk outside the Capitol in which I was tried to describe what was going on as bribery. And I said that if you wanted to adopt these same principles in your own life, I would advise you against giving a policeman $25 when he stops you and saying this is just a contribution.
Right.
Because we have developed a completely different standard for the role of industry.
Although just before the New York Police Department really cracked down hard on the Occupy movement, Jamie Dimon and his bank gave, $4.5 million or something like that to the New York Police Benevolent Association.
Right.
So apparently, if you're rich enough, you can still do it. You can still give money to the cops and buy their behavior. But I'm astonished by this. The DLC still exists. Harold Ford Jr. is the head of it right now. Do I have that right?
I think that I'm not sure what its exact status is. I think it is kind of faded. I think because it's done its work. And when Obama came along, what was interesting was that he was in part a favorite target of the DLC. But they, at that point, had enough negative publicity. They didn't want that really known. And so that they sort of faded from the scene.
So is Obama an anti-DLC Democrat?
No. He was fine with them. I mean, he was one of their creations in part.
Right. So.
But the thing was that there was enough. He was trying to present himself as far more liberal than he was.
Oh, yeah. Well, Bill Clinton campaigned with his New Covenant speech on reviving FDR's New Deal, and he never did any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And Obama campaigned on
one of the
NAFTA.
problems you got with this is that it's not just the media doesn't cover the present, but it doesn't cover the past.
Right.
And as a result, I happen to, my father worked in the New Deal, and I covered the Great Society, and I'm aware of this shift and how hard it is to get people to pay attention to. And let me just give you one little example, because I think it's so beautiful. In 1933, President elect Roosevelt, asked Frances Perkins to be his Secretary of Labor.
Right.
And she comes in with a piece of paper to the new incoming president of the United States, says, yes, I'll be your Secretary of Labor as long as you support a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, unemployment compensation, abolition of child labor, Social Security, and universal health insurance. And Roosevelt went along. Can you imagine anybody doing that today?
Right. Well, I've read a variation of that, only the opposite, that after Bill Clinton was elected in 92, in early 93, a couple of weeks before his inauguration, Robert Rubin and Jamie Dimon and Alan Greenspan, as I recall, or maybe it was Larry Summers and Alan Greenspan and one of the banksters, sat him down and said, son, here's the facts of life, and you're not going to govern based on what you campaigned on.
Right.
Is that an apocryphal story, or is that true?
Yeah. And the other thing is, I carry this around in my pocket because it's...
So it's money, 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 money. And that's when I look at the wiki on Pamela Harriman, a focus, a funnel for money, 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 money. That's all it's about with these people. And I can't believe that the majority of voters support that. I can't believe that they think those people are going to work in their interests. Now, maybe America's just too soft. Maybe most people, I know that we're doing okay, except for some parts of town, right? I shouldn't laugh, right? I shouldn't laugh at that, because that's exactly what the problem is, right? Nobody cares about the other part of town. Nobody cares about people living in little tiny houses that were built 60 years ago. Way before we ever even heard of tiny houses. And it cracks me up when I see people who think that tiny houses is a solution to homelessness. Well, yeah, it kind of is. So are slums. So are ghettos. Oh, I'd like to let you see my face, because all I'm doing is shaking my head. And when I laugh, I'm not really laughing. I laugh at things because they're absurd, right? I mean, they're just absolutely absurd. The country is absurd. The little places where poverty hides from the rest of us, well, we hide it, right? Sweep it under the rug, what have you. And granted, it's not the worst kind of poverty ever in the history of poverty, but we always talk about economic growth. Economic growth, GNP, gross national product. Well, what better way to increase the gross national product? I mean, we can't create more wealth for people who already have money. That won't increase GNP. Maybe if you have some warped idea how to, but I or maybe GNP is just not really a useful figure. I mean, what we need is something a number that represents how many people are living on the streets, how many people are don't have a job and don't have money and all that kind of stuff. I mean, when you say GNP, what does that have to do with how many homeless people we've reinvented and made a life out of? That's success. That's success. That's I'm all for helping out like working class families who are having a hard time of it, but what about all the people down below them? It's like I mean, when I'm watching the news and when I'm watching people talk, even Bernie Sanders talk, well, no, not Bernie Sanders, he does care about the least amongst us, but a lot of these people, all they want to talk about is the middle class. Why? Because there's a lot of, or people who think they're middle class, because there's a lot of voters there they can get, Poor people can't even make it to the polls. I don't even know if they're legally able. I mean, if you don't have an address, and how many poor people vote? Probably don't. They're probably too dismayed to vote. They probably just stay at home. So, as a result, nobody courts their vote. Well, we need to organize the poor. I know that's one of the hardest things in the world, and I say we do it with the Reboot Army. I think the Reboot Army would be ideal for getting out there and documenting the poor, and at the same time registering them and making sure that they have a way to vote, because they need to represent themselves. If we combine them representing themselves with us representing them, the people who actually care about them, I know of course they're going to be despicable people, right? Of course they are. Can they help it? Can they help but be smelly and bad breath and no teeth and dirty and everything else? Of course not. But for the people who just say, oh, well, they're dirty and smelly and I don't care about them, well, you're ignoring how they got that way. Okay? People don't just come out of the womb being dirty and smelly and horrible. Okay? They get that way because we allow the breakdown of society. We don't make sure that somebody takes care of them when they're growing up. We don't make sure that they either get a job or an income at least. something to where, and health care, you know, the lack of health care hurts them a lot. So, so who's ultimately responsible? We are. We the people. And why can't we do it? Why can't we make it a place? Well, because we've got the powers that be out there arrayed against us when it comes to wanting to do something. Well, we have to fight that battle. You know, we have to win that battle, and forever. So, I still say the way to do it is with the Reboot Army. For those of you who are not familiar with the Reboot Army, okay, the Reboot Army. We pay our soldiers $15 an hour to canvass for reboot candidates. Tired of wearing your feet out for free? How about doing it for minimum wage instead? Our minimum wage. We're raising money to pay people to get out there and promote our anti-establishment candidates. Need a job, need some extra cash, want to earn it fighting for a great cause? Check us out. And imagine if I could hire a whole bunch of homeless people. And yeah, I'd keep my eye on them. I know they probably are not the most trustworthy people in the world. Now next week I'll be going out and registering the Reboot Army as a non-profit political organization, and for those of you who want to send me money for the news here, donate money. I know a lot of people donate, you know. Maybe you could donate to me too. I mean, I work like 6 hours a day making this thing. It takes forever. Well, a lot of it is sitting around waiting for stuff to process, but believe me, the production, I know it's amateur, I know that it's not like you know, Democracy Now! Or something like that. A lot of it is just me talking to myself. But hey, you know, if you want to help out, I won't say no. So I'll do something good with the money. I won't just spend it on a new pair of fancy shoes or something. I mean, I'll spend it on the broadcast somehow. I don't know what I'll do with it. I'll tell you guys though. I mean, I'll brag, oh, so-and-so sent me some money and look what I did with it, you know? So, if you go to Reboot Army, I mean, if you're on Facebook, you should just be able to type in the Reboot Army with an exclamation point, and it should come up. And in the pinned post, you can find out where to send me money. I have a mailing address where I receive mail, so it's not where I actually live, but it's a place I can depend on to get my mail. And next week I'll be going out, like I say, and doing some work on this, but mainly I'll be going to the bank, and I'll be setting up bank accounts, one for the Reboot Army, like I say, if you want to send it into the to help this news broadcast, then just make it out to me, Martin Drummond, so, and send it here to the same address. And we'll also be trying to raise money for reboot candidates, which, if you're familiar with that, you know, both really great causes that have absolutely zero funding, and I'm not going to fund them. I don't make enough money. I'll administer them, but I don't make enough money to fund either one of them. And they're your candidates, you know, so fund them. This is another really good article from Salon, and I'll definitely post it on this segment. It's really long.
Clintonism screwed the Democrats. How Bill, Hillary and the Democratic Leadership Council gutted progressivism. Imagine there's no Clintons. It's easy if you try. Without pernicious VLZ, liberalism is a stronger movement today. Paul Rosenberg, April 30, 2016, 3:30 p.m. Hillary Clinton today promotes herself as a reformer with results, and she relied on a widespread impression that she and Bernie Sanders aren't really that far apart on major issues. After the last round of primaries in the Northeast, she expressed it again, because whether you support Senator Sanders or you support me, there's much more that unites us than divides us. We all agree that wages are too low and inequality is too high, that Wall Street can't never again be allowed to threaten Main Street, and we should expand Social Security, not cut or privatize it. We Democrats agree that college should be affordable to all, and student debt shouldn't hold anyone back. Of course, it's not just Democrats. The points she touched on have broad popular support, despite elite hostility, or at best neglect, which is a large part of why Sanders went from 3% support in the polls to near parity in some April polls. Fox, NBC/WSJ, Ipsos/Reuters. But Clinton is a skilled politician, so she's artfully realigned herself to blur their differences, with overwhelming support from the elite punditocracy. When the dark side of the Clinton record from 1990s is raised, NAFTA, Defense of Marriage Act, welfare reform, mass incarceration, Wall Street deregulation, etc. Two defenses come readily to mind. Hillary didn't do it! Bill was president and times change / you read forgetting what it was like. These are both effective narratives in the establishment echo chamber, which is designed and intended for horse race politics at the expense of political understanding as well as factual accuracy. But Hillary Clinton wouldn't be here today if she hadn't been aligned with those policies and with helping to create the environment in which they came to pass. Even before entering the White House with her husband, who had promised voters 2 for the price of 1 during the 1992 campaign, the pair had cast their lot in with those who moved the party to the right, most notably when Bill Clinton became head of the DLZ, the Democratic Leadership Council, or as Jesse Jackson called it, Democrats for the Leisure Class. The DLZ was crucial to the Clintons' rise to power, so it's absolutely essential to understand it, if one wants to understand their politics and that of the party they've so profoundly reshaped all the way up through Hillary Clinton's most recent re-articulation of the day. An excellent starting point for understanding this comes via the much broader focus of Thomas Ferguson and Joe Rogers's book, Right Turn: The Decline of the Democrats and the Future of American Politics. While the book makes references going back to the Carter era, it opens with a meeting of 20 top Democratic Party fundraisers 3 weeks after Walter Mondale's landslide loss in the 1984 election, where they discussed 1988 and how they could have more policy influence in that campaign, how they might use their fundraising skills to move the party toward their business-oriented, centrist viewpoints, as the Washington Post reported the next day. It goes on to describe how, 2 days later, a closely related group, the Coalition for a Democratic Majority, sponsored a similarly themed public forum that drew national press attention, dominated by speeches given by Arizona Governor Bruce Babbitt and Virginia Governor Charles Robb, who, in turn, were also prominent founding members of the Democratic Leadership Council in the following spring, along with Missouri Representative Richard Jefford and Georgia Senator Sam Nunn. The moderate and conservative Democrats didn't make it past the first round in its primaries in 1984, and we want to change that, said Nunn, a major Democratic proponent of increased military spending who had backed John Glenn in the 1984 race. Right Turn makes it abundantly clear that the DLC was just one facet of a much broader mosaic of elite political reorientation, a reorientation profoundly out of step with the American people, as the book also takes pains to point out. Salon contributor Corey Robin recently illuminated this broader elite shift in a blog post. When neoliberalism was young, a look back on Clintonism before Clinton, citing in particular the Neoliberals Manifesto by Charles Peters, founder and editor of the Washington Monthly, in which the basic orientation is announced in the opening paragraph. Robin notes, "We still believe in liberty and justice for all, in mercy for the afflicted and help for the down and out. But we no longer automatically favor unions and big government or oppose the military and big business. Indeed, in our search for solutions that work, we have to distrust all automatic responses, liberal or conservative." This captures neoliberalism in a nutshell, a disavowal of New Deal liberalism in the posture of open-mindedness, which whoops, I did it again, repeatedly lends itself to conservative co-optation. It quickly became the popular stance in the Democratic donor class, spread further by the publications they finance and other political infrastructure. Still, the DLC emerged to play a much more central role than most of the other forces involved, specifically because of Bill Clinton. All From tells the story like this. A little after 4 o'clock on the afternoon of April 6, 1989, I walked into the office of Governor Bill Clinton on the second floor of the Arkansas State Capitol in Little Rock. "I've got a deal for you," I told Clinton after a few minutes of political chit-chat. "If you agree to become chairman of the LZ, we'll pay for your travel around the country, we'll work together on an agenda, and I think you'll be president one day and we'll both be important." With that proposition, Clinton agreed to become chairman of the Democratic Leadership Council, and our partnership was born. Clinton was a natural fit for the LZ, Frum said. Both Clintons, in fact. He was not afraid to challenge old orthodoxies. In the early 1980s, long before I knew him, he and Hillary Clinton pushed cutting-edge education reforms, like pay for performance and public school choice, against the opposition of the powerful Arkansas Education Association, fighting teachers' unions. Just like Bernie Sanders, I'm sure. As far as the LZ was concerned, Joan Walsh put things a little more realistically here in 2003. Clinton took the DLC's shelves of policy wonk manifestos and dark warnings about special interest politics, and turned it into an agenda for winning elections and governing, with his own charm and his own brand of compromise and conciliation. Not the LC founder all Frums. The DLC thinks it made Bill Clinton, but in fact Clinton made the LZ. Without his charisma and political smarts, its earnest, castor oil approach to politics and policy would never have won a national election. The same, of course, is true of Hillary Clinton as well. However smart, educated, and otherwise well qualified she may be as much as anyone in her generation, arguably she would never have been where she is today without her husband's charisma and political smarts, which in turn undermines her retroactive efforts to disavow the path they blazed together. And that path was progressive because From decided to label it so as pushback against journalists' more accurate recognition that it represented a conservative force within the Democratic Party. As Paul Starr wrote in 2014, in 1991, Clinton told the TLC conference in Cleveland, "Our new choice plainly rejects the old ideologies and the false choices they impose. Our agenda isn't liberal or conservative. It is both, and it is different." This denial of labels was a way of getting people to listen. Eventually, though, needing a label, From settled on progressive, an ironic choice. During the Cold War, progressive had meant left of liberal as in Henry Wallace's Progressive Party, but it now came to refer vaguely to any viewpoint left of center. From says he called the TLC's policy arm the Progressive Policy Institute because he was tired of his organization being described by journalists as conservative. Even the claim of being vaguely left of center is a questionable one, considering the vast differences between elite and mass opinion which have so shaken and confused elites this cycle. It's arguably more instructive to recall that in 1896, running against the populist/Democratic Party alliance headed by William Jennings Bryan, William McKinley's Big Business Republicans successfully portrayed themselves as representing the forces of progress. It's an extremely ambiguous term, to say the least. Clinton's description of their agenda as neither liberal nor conservative, but both and different perfectly exemplifies this ambiguity. While it's true that the TLC's formation was born out of a widespread Democratic donor class revolt, and was intended to combat forces pushing the party to the left, that's not the full story of its genesis, and it's misleading to ignore that there were some genuinely progressive motivations involved. We need to understand that side of the story, too, if we're to understand the limitations that live on today in Hillary Clinton's continuing claims to be a progressive. And for that, we can turn to Mark Schmidt's look back in 2011, when the Democratic Leadership Council mattered, just after the TLC closed its doors. The real TLC was far more complicated, though not necessarily more benign, than its caricature in the 2000s, when it became best known for blind support of the Iraq War and for thunderall from simmering anger at anti-Iraq war liberals like Howard Dean and Ned Lamont. Schmidt wrote, "To understand the real TLC, it's useful to know the name Gillis Long, the Louisiana congressman cousin of the legendary Huey Long who chaired the House Democratic caucus after Reagan's election. Both the TLC co-founder Will Marshall, who now runs the thriving and independent think tank the Progressive Policy Institute (PPI), and From had worked for Long and remained devoted to him after his death, on the day of Reagan's second inauguration. The TLC was, in significant ways, an effort to keep Long's style of politics alive. but chasing the chimera of a South that was going to elect more than the occasional longer Florida Governor Lawton Chiles led the LZ into a cul-de-sac, in which the pursuit of white Southern votes became an end in itself, and so the fight to eliminate affirmative action and reform welfare, neither of which would much affect the economic well-being of the working middle class that was already losing ground, became the organization's touchstone issues in the mid-1990s. Racial politics, not corporatism, was the more controversial aspect of the DLZ at the time. Jesse Jackson called it Democrats for the leisure class. Which is why it's so ironic to see Hillary Clinton depending so heavily minority support, especially Southern blacks, to not only keep her candidacy alive, but also her reputation as a progressive. Schmidt goes on to say, but at least the organization was thinking about how to construct a working majority with progressive ideas at the heart of it. But there are three distinct problems here. First, how progressive were those ideas? Second, were they really at the heart of what the DLZ was doing? And third, what working majority? The third problem is far less subject to obfuscation than the other two. The fact that Democrats lost the House in a landslide 2 years after Clinton's election for the first time in 40 years, and held on to it for 12 years after that, does not square at all with notion that Clinton saved the Democratic Party, or that DLZ politics constructed a working majority with progressive ideas at the heart of it. In fact, they did the exact opposite. They destroyed the Democratic House majority, which had long been a bastion for progressive ideas and political leaders. That fact alone casts doubts about the whole thrust of the DLC's progressive claims. After all, if their argument was like Clinton's today, that they are pragmatic progressives, then their failure to build an enduring political majority undermines the very core of their argument. The fact that the same pattern of record-breaking congressional losses and state legislative ones as well repeated itself with Barack Obama should tell us something. Obama had nothing to do with the DLZ directly, but he grew up politically in the world that the DLZ did so much to create, and he espoused a similar desire to be neither liberal nor conservative, neither blue state nor red state, but both and something different. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were both successful politicians individually, but neither was successful in constructing the working majority with progressive ideas at the heart of it, even if you don't question how progressive their ideas really were. Perhaps the best way to understand their success, as well as the limits of this brand of progressive ideas, is through analytic lens of Augustus Cochran II's 2001 book, Democracy Heading South: National Politics in the Shadow of Dixie. Cochran argued that the same sorts of maladies which afflicted the South circa 1950, diagnosed in V.O.Key's classic Southern Politics and State and Nation, had come to afflict the nation as a whole. The specific structures might differ, lungs versus gills, but the functions, or dysfunctions, were strikingly similar, he argued, with political power held tight by wealthy elites while the majority of voters were confused, disengaged, or entirely absent, with politics serving them primarily as entertainment. In the 1950s era South, its one-party system was functionally a no-party system, operating somewhat differently from state to state. In the country at large, The same result later came from a delightment of politics, the White House controlled by one party, Congress by another, a frequent, but not dominant pattern in American politics until 1968, after which it's become the normal state of affairs. The intensified role of money and media served to accelerate the breakdown of party bonds and further entrepreneurial politics, in which individual politicians thrive by branding themselves, regardless of how party allies may fare. Male entitlement at its worst. This is the environment in which Bill Clinton and Barack Obama proved so successful, even as their parties crumbled. Their branding worked first and foremost with the donor class, and then the broader political elite, which provides guidance to the mass public in ordinary times. But this system fails to really engage the public directly, to respond to their needs, which is why participation falls off so sharply during midterm elections, leaving the possibility of a working majority with a well-thought-out, reality-based policy agenda increasingly out of reach. The TLZ brand of progressivism was perfectly crafted within this corrupt system of politics to enable certain individual politicians to succeed with their targeted messages and well-honed promises, combining responsibility on the one hand and compassion on the other. The Clintons' early 80s fight against the Arkansas Teachers Union was a textbook example of how this worked, which is why Fromm cited that example as showing that the Clintons were made for the TLZ. The problem Cochrane described is not about corrupt individuals, necessarily, but it is about systems in which mass organizations like teachers' unions are automatically labeled corrupt. In an upside-down world like that, things are bound to be confusing. Which is why that world favors clear, crisp messaging more than almost anything else. Reformer with results is a powerful branding message, regardless of how meager those results may be, or even how toxic they are now seen to be 2 decades on down the road. In the end, the real problem with Bill and Hillary Clinton-style progressivism is not only what a mixed bag its results have proven to be. There's also the further problem of how it muddles our vision of what a truly successful progressive politics might look like. Now, more than ever, we need to go back and ask ourselves, what were the roads not taken? Where could they have led us instead of here? And how can we create similar alternatives going forward? That's a conversation we've barely even begun to have.
As I've listened to Clinton, she likes to really try and talk about Main Street and saving Main Street and helping Main Street, and what the fuck is Main Street? Anybody live on Main Street around here? No. What she's referring to is, Leave It to Beaver, the Wally, all those old sitcoms from the 50s and 60s where there were always problems, but they were always taken care of by the husband. The husband always made enough money to have a nice house and all that kind of stuff, and she's like saying, we won't ever let those bad people on Wall Street threaten you again. It's so fucking racist. It's so white supremacist. It's so white entitlement. Ugh. I can't imagine how black people and Hispanics feel when they hear her talk like that. How were they ever fooled by her? She wasn't talking about Hispanics or black people. She wasn't talking about helping people in ghettos and in urban nightmares and all those places that we know exist. I do. I've been there. You know, I don't avoid the bad parts of town. I go down there and I just mill around. If nothing else, I'll at least drive around. Might be afraid to get out of my car. Lexington, Kentucky is not that bad. You know, you can walk down 7th Street, but you take your chances. You take your chances. I mean, some young guy was just killed the other day. I heard he was walking out of to his car from a place on 7th Street, and some black guys shot him. So it's dangerous, you know, and you know, those black people are the way they are because of poverty, not and because of despair. And if that's not true, then why don't you get white people gunning people down in the middle of the street and you know, in their rich areas? I've never heard of somebody just shooting somebody where I lived, anywhere I've ever lived in all my life, because I've never lived in a ghetto. Well, I take that back. In Houston, for a brief time, I lived in a pretty bad apartment complex, and there were, well, I don't know. I never really knew what went on. When you'd hear something going on outside, you just stay inside until you didn't hear it anymore. And in the morning, you'd race to your car and go to work, and when you got back, you'd race back into your apartment. And I don't blame any of those people. You know, we talk about those people, how mad they get when they say those people. I was one of those people for a brief period of time. I don't blame them. I don't blame them for the part of town they're stuck in, you know. I don't blame them for the way that part of town is. I don't blame them. But chivalry is not about helping them out. When she talks about threatening Main Street, you know, I mean, she must be sitting over there going, there aren't enough blacks down there in that part of Houston to hurt my chances, so I'll just try and turn out the Main Street. Yeah, you see, it's not Main Street. Main Street's just a bunch of businesses, if anything, and there's nobody hardly down there except for people working. When she says Main Street, she's talking about Leave It to Beaver and Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and all that kind of stuff. She's talking about that. And she's full of shit. She's not going to protect them either. They're already protected to a certain extent. I mean, if they're towing the party line and kissing the right ass and kissing their boss's ass, you know, pucker up. I love that one scene with Robin Williams, the Fisher King, with that guy. He's such a good actor. He was the devil in Parnassus, the Illusionarium or whatever it was. Famous musician. Anyway, he said, yeah, pucker up, Jack. Go in there and kiss your boss's ass. Whatever, I can't do it. I could show it to you, though. You want to see it? I'll show it to you in a minute. So let's hear what else this guy has to say about the Clintons. I mean, he's obviously an expert.
Oh, it so stuns people. But the Works Progress Administration of the New Deal helped to build or repair 2,500 hospitals, 2,500 sports arenas, 3,900 schools, 8,000 parks, 12,000 playgrounds, 124,000 bridges, and 125,000 public buildings. And we just have no concept of that being possible today.
Right. Yeah, it really, truly is astonishing. And in part because of the DLC that in part was funded by Koch Industries. And
Right.
According to this article I read, there's a couple people from Koch Industries who were on the executive committee of the DLC. So
I'm not sure about that, but
is Hillary Clinton a DLC Democrat? Do we know?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think that they went with Obama. I think they were that election was basically a choice between the establishment who said, okay, it's time, we got to have either a woman or a black president.
Right.
And so Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were the acceptable ones.
So to the DLC.
To the DLC, right.
Right, so
I think that...
and Bernie Sanders is probably not in the favor of the DLC.
No. And I think they really have faded, but they've done their work.
Yeah.
And the problem is, how do you turn that around? And of course, Bernie Sanders is part of the story. My own feeling is that for labor unions, one of the things they could be doing is to create a labor equivalent of the AARP.
Yeah.
Okay, well, anyway, Tom is on Russian television now, RT, I think International, used to be RT America, there may be both of them. He's on there. He's really good still. He's still very progressive. He still knows the difference between Hillary and Bernie. Not very many people do. So basically Hillary's full of shit, you know. Her defend Wall Street or defend, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, look at Obama. He took all of those Wall Street people and surrounded himself with all them Wall Street people, and she would most certainly do the same. It was like she sent them to him, you know. So yeah, the whole thing's bullshit, man.
New Hampshire, you told the crowd you, quote, take a backseat to no one when it comes to progressive values.
I take a backseat to no one if you look at my record and standing up and fighting for progressive values.
Last month in Ohio, you said you plead guilty to, quote, being kind of moderate and center. Do you change your political identity based on who you're talking to?
No, I think that, like most people that I know, I have a range of views, but they are rooted in my values and my experience.
You know, I get accused of being kind of moderate and center. I plead guilty.
Just for the record, are you a progressive or are you a moderate?
I'm a progressive.
Google intensifies censorship of left-wing websites by Andrea Damon. Google has intensified its censorship of left-wing websites, progressive and anti-war sites, cutting the search traffic of 13 leading news outlets by 55% since April. On August 2nd, the World Socialist website reported that changes to Google's search algorithm had led the search traffic of these sites to drop by 45%. According to figures by the search analysis service SEMrush. In the ensuing weeks, the search traffic of every one of these sites, without exception, has plunged further, leading the total search traffic for the sites to fall by an additional 9 percentage points. The World Socialist website, whose search traffic had fallen by 67% between April and July, has now experienced a total drop in search traffic of 74%. By other measures, the WSWS's performance and search results has been impacted even more substantially. On September 16, the latest date available, articles from the WSWS were shown in search results 68,000 times, down from over 450,000 in April. This constitutes a decline of some 85%. As a result of Google's censorship, the WSWS's global page rank has fallen from 31,000 to 41.
Okay, so I think this has something to do with Google being sued for placing its stuff first, and so they went and changed their algorithms so that they were in compliance with the law, but they were angry, right? So let's just assume that they probably went and changed it in other ways too, kind of like tit for tat bullshit. I think a lot of times these companies, when they come under attack, they kind of feel like just because the people who are attacking them are liberals or progressives, that the entire liberal and progressive community, so it's like a terrorist, you know. He gets bombed with a U.S. bomb from a Saudi plane or something, or maybe an American plane. He can't do anything about that, so he'll go shoot up a nightclub, or, you know, bomb a newspaper or whatever. And it seems to me that that's what they're doing. I mean, I find it hard to believe that they aren't targeting, because the names are they're all my favorite places, like Democracy Now! And places like that. But what he says later on, and I didn't let it get to it, is that it doesn't matter, because the people who we're getting as new members, like members of the show, they're not seeing it on Google. They're not Googling I mean, I Googled Democracy Now! And other people's do, because I already know they're there, and I Google it as Democracy Now! What this is affecting is when you don't Google Democracy Now! But instead Google something and get a whole bunch of results. Now, is Democracy Now! Or World Socialist website, these guys we're listening to right now, are they in there? Well, what they're saying is, by their analysis, they're not, and everybody else is. So it's like it's going out of its way to, now that can't be just a coincidence, right? Now, granted, in the context of the entire nation, everything else that is not socialist or progressive is more popular. And only because people are stupid, right? I mean, if they were smart, they would want to learn about anti-democratic establishment type stuff, instead of concentrating on that age-old war between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, we're at war with establishment Democrats. We're at war with Republicans, but that's been put on hold. I mean, it's just like we put on hold caring about refugees and people around the world until we do something about our own poor, our own refugees. You know, Tom Petty had it right with his song Refugee. I mean, you can be a refugee right here. You don't have to come from Ecuador or wherever, Somalia or any of those places, Syria, Afghanistan. Which it seems funny that we bitch about people coming from Syria and Afghanistan when we're bombing them directly, us. So, you know, World Socialist website, they're right to complain, but they already, you know, unless they can get a judgment against them, which we just did get a judgment against Google for doing what I was talking about. So, I can't help but think that they're related.
Why is Amazon deleting negative reviews of Hillary Clinton's new book by Andrew Damon? Amazon, the world's largest online reseller, has deleted over 1,000 negative comments on Hillary Clinton's newly released book. What happened to give the book a 5-star rating? The book's Amazon user rating is higher than the most popular editions of War and Peace and A Tale of Two Cities, widely considered to be among the greatest books ever written. Early on Wednesday,
Okay. I'm doing other things in the background, unfortunately, but you get the point, right? I mean, so there's no doubt about it. I mean, the Clintonistas, the Hill Trolls, are everywhere, and they're doing all kinds of different things. Obviously, Amazon is one of them, and being as big as they are, that's a problem, right? And it's a problem in general that all the companies, and I mean, that's everything we see, everything we hear, unless we, go out of our way to avoid it, like I do. And then I even pick it up and it used to be that you could never, even me, who goes out of my way to get socialist website and Democracy Now! And all these things, and Democracy Now! Doesn't usually cover stuff quite as well as World Socialist website. I strongly suggest you find World Socialist website. But so there didn't used to be coverage of this, so people who went to the stores and stuff, they thought that that's just the way it is, right? Well, no, it's actually, they're inserting their politics into economics. It's interchangeable, economics and politics. In a capitalist system, in an oligarchy like we have, you're going to get that, right? The capitalist system is going to work for the oligarchy, and that's just the way it is. I'm not saying that's the way it should be, and that's what this show's all about, is working to change that, because it's awful. I mean, it's 1984 awful, right? Or one of those Orwellian things. That they would be manipulating political content like that. And how pathetic are the Clintoons and the Obamas and the whole Democratic establishment? How pathetic are they that they have to go and cheat, they've got the answers written on the inside of their arm or something. How pathetic are they?
With clear evidence, we're seeing things that still acquit someone, and that's very frustrating. It's like now even we're fighting to get body cameras. Well, what's the point of spending tax dollars on body cameras if the evidence that's presented is not enough to prove guilt or innocence?
The statement that Timothy Wilson passed on with that not guilty verdict was he has empowered the cops to be able to do what they want to do and let them know that you are above the law. Employ whatever tactic you need.
Okay, so yeah. I mean, there's not much I can say about this. I mean, there is, but I think that I've made it abundantly clear that the cops are out of control. The cops are bad before they're even cops. They're racist and they're angry. Cops, priests, and soldiers, they're all bottom of the barrel. I mean, everybody I know who's been any one of them has like severe problems. Most of the people I know who joined the churches or whatever, mostly my experiences with the Catholic Church, have all been really like out to prove something. They're like needy and guilty. They've got like this guilty kind of conscience. Who knows what they did, molested somebody or did something that they feel like they need, they can't forgive themselves, so they're looking for some kind of divine forgiveness. So anyway, they all have mental problems. They're all unstable. And then most of the people who I know who've either joined the military or become cops, they've all been like really angry and looking to hit somebody, and all the bullshit that goes with joining the police force, the military, about how you're going to be better than everybody else and you're going to serve the people, and at the same time you're sitting there thinking, I'm going to serve the people, but what I'm going to do is get a license to abuse them if I want, right? I'm sure that most cops kind of ice over the fact that they're aggressive and angry and try and that's how conservatives do things, is they put some altruistic, some good kind of reasons for what they're doing over the top of all the bad reasons, right? So you get all these cops who, I'm there to serve and protect and bust skulls. Sorry, I mean, I always think it's funny when I kind of observe or comment on just flat out evil shit, right? So, and in the military, I mean, they're doing more than busting skulls, right? They're torturing and murdering, shooting innocent people, shooting people who I mean, a lot of the people who were fighting, they started out as just angry about the murders that they saw, the bombings, I mean, the stories are true. It's about our troops, like when they'd be out in patrol in Baghdad, and they'd play this game where they'd just shoot somebody on the side of the road and kill them. Most of the time, I mean, maybe some people got lucky. But some of our guys are just, I mean, all of our guys, except for a very few, are bad. Our troops, our police, whether they get a chance to act that out or not, some of them obviously do because we hear about it. So, and this is about cops. So cops are out of control. They're nutso. They're trying to prove something. They're trained badly. They're motivated to do those. They're trained to. They're trained in ways that eventually their anger and their frustration manifests itself in real violence on real people who don't deserve it. You're just supposed to handcuff people and put them in a car and take them to prison. You're not supposed to beat them on the way. You're not supposed to verbally abuse them. That's their job if they happen to be really bad people. And you can't seem to, cops can't seem to differentiate between somebody who's bad and somebody who isn't. I mean, that's where it comes down to a lot of the time, is we see these people, they clearly are not bad, like Orlando, or whatever his name, Castillo, the guy who, that Mexican-American cop, shot for nothing. I mean, he didn't do anything. He just made the mistake of saying, I've got a gun in the car. The guy pulls out a gun and shoots him. Oh, that was a horrible thing, wasn't it? So anyway, the cops are out. Okay, well, I like to believe that people are listening to me, because when I say something, it just seems like it happens. I mean, I will talk about, I'm always talking about Bernie running independent of the DNC, right? I'm always constantly talking on Facebook, obviously, and to all my Facebook friends and to all the people in my groups about how whoever we run, because we ran Bernie, and it was our first shot, right? It's the first time that progressives got together and made a niche for Bernie to fall into, and he did. And I've talked about that many times. And what Bernie fell into was the hole that we dug by being anti-Clinton, by being anti-Hillary. So we made it well known that there was a large group of people who didn't want Hillary Clinton to be the nominee. And at that time, she was already anointed. I mean, this is like 2014. And she's already anointed as the next president of the United States. And some of us start going, hey, what's going on? I mean, it's like this, it's like everything is Hillary's the next president. We were enormously disturbed by this, and we started causing trouble. We started getting kicked out of groups, and so we didn't have a voice, so we started forming our own things. So what I'm saying is it seems like I'll talk about things, and then lo and behold. So now we've got all kinds of people going to Bernie, and well, I'll let you listen to it.
Ahead of time, but was not present to receive the plea, and ensured that no one in his office was present either. He has not made a comment on the entreaties. Such was the inauspicious beginning of the People's...
So as usual, Bernie's ignoring us. Bernie ignored Bernie or bust. Or never Hillary. All those different... I mean, we're in his face. Now, Bernie, this is my message to you. If you ignore us, you're gonna lose again. You know, if you want to win, you need to get behind us. We're the ones who put you out there in the first place. I mean, we love your platform, but you can't back establishment candidates. You can't make deals with the DNC. We want you to run as a Democrat, but whoever we run as a Democrat is going to completely ignore the DNC. We're going to have our own fundraising, our own call banks, our own everything we're going to do. And when they win, our institutions are going to replace all their institutions. The Democratic Party is going to completely change. It's not going to have those unfair and cheating and all that stuff, DNC, etc., etc. That's why we're going to run our candidates. That's why we ran you. I mean, you have to be anti-democratic establishment. I know that you've grown up politically in an environment where you worked with Democrats, and so maybe some of them are good in some ways, but a lot of them are really bad. I mean, like Schumer and this law to make people who support the BDS, I mean, all that kind of stuff, you can't work with those people. It just doesn't work. I know that you stood up against people taking money from our enemies, so from corporations and stuff. You stood up against Hillary, I'm sorry. She's a shill. and her name is Hillary, so her name is Shillery. By the way, with a $sign for an S. I like that. I didn't make that one up. Somebody added that to my name, Shillery, that I came up with. So you can't support those people. I'm sorry, you know, you may see that as a reality, but it's not. Reality can change. Huh? I mean, just like you take a beach and build a sandcastle. Sandcastle wasn't there. Reality can change. We can change it so that we don't. We're the opposition, Bernie. And Bernie, you're on our side. Now you can continue to work with them, as in talk to them and deal with them, but you can't support them. You can't support their bad ways. That's what you're doing. You know? And I get the argument that, well, they're better than the Republicans. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. But try doing things our way, because we pick the candidates. You know? We're going to pick somebody who is anti-DNC. And if you don't understand that, then you're not paying attention. Because our candidates in, like, the reboot candidates, Democratic Party reboot candidates, they're all they all don't work with the DNC or any corporate. They don't accept donations from our enemies, bribes, all of them. And if all of them can do that because they're not winners yet, so can you. So you're going to have to work with us.
Convergence, organized over the weekend by the founder of the Draft Bernie for People's Party campaign, Nick Brana. The event attracted only about 140 registrants, with a few dozen walk-ins who joined throughout the weekend. While ostensibly called to discuss whether progressives should fight to reform the Democratic Party or start a new political party, all those participating shared an orientation to the Democrats, around whom they orbit and which they look for leadership. Socialist Alternative, the Green Party, the Progressive Independent Party, and Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, were all present. Some of the most well-known figures included Socialist Alternative leader Kshama Sawant, celebrity professor and DSA member Cornel West, Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, and Code Pink founder Medea Benjamin. The central political fraud.
So, you know, they're all there, and they all represent their little parties, and of course the Green Party is probably the biggest one. But they're not going to make that much of a difference, even if they manage to band together temporarily for stuff like this. I mean, Bernie wouldn't even send somebody else out there to talk to them. He just completely blew them off. And if he's going to do that and work with the Democratic establishment like he did last time, then he's not going to be our candidate. I mean, he doesn't have much time left anyway. Maybe the solution is to find somebody who isn't like Bernie, who is like Bernie in the platform that he supports, you know, all the stuff, free education, all the things that are in our future anyway. I mean, sooner or later, as we progress, if we allow, I mean, if we don't allow the Republicans to destroy this country, as we progress, we will end up with all of the things that are on the socialist platform. An end to racism, especially institutionalized. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the platform. If you don't know what the platform is, go find out. Go check out Bernie's platform. Go check out the Justice Democrats platform, and I don't think Justice Democrats are anything to do with the Young Turks anymore. So that's kind of a thing on its own now. And if it's not, the platform is, because they don't support anti-establishment, the anti-establishment movement anymore. But anyway, the platforms are there. You can find out what a progressive platform is. So they'll agree with Bernie on the platform, but on the dealing with the DNC and the Democratic establishment, which is really just a rogue. At this point, the DNC and the Democratic establishment, all their little councils and whatever that they have, they're all rogue Democrat organizations. They're organizations that are run by the Republicans, basically. They're just wolves in sheep's clothing, right? I mean, it's just bullshit is what it is. Makes me so angry that Democrats allowed these assholes to do that to us. And of course, my whole earlier segment was about the DLL's Democratic Leadership Council and all that bullshit. Well, what a bunch of nonsense. The Clintons and even the Obamas, you know, they all turned out to be just huge mistakes. Okay, maybe, and if you think that they're really not working for the establishment, that they're separate and that we're all making all this up, well then look at the track record, not of what they said they would do, but what they actually did to. I mean, the country's been driven into the ground. Everybody works for like Walmart for $7 an hour. Okay, it's not quite that bad, but it's close. I mean, I'll break it down. If you make $20,000 or $30,000 a year, you're part of the, you know, I mean, you're poor. You can't even afford a decent place to live and transportation. And you're working all day and not achieving much of anything except for helping rich people, you know, putting money into rich people's pockets. Well, there aren't very many people in this country who make much more than that. I mean, maybe if you add in their food stamps and stuff, the country's just been, and then there's a select group of people who make more than that, right? And the requirement, the unstated, the unspoken requirement to be in that group is that you support the establishment, either as a Republican or as a fake Democrat. I mean, that's reality to me. That's what I see, you know, and they all do. They all are apologists for the establishment, whether it's saying, well, the police have a hard job to do, or, you know, that Copernicus, I don't know his name, Kaepernick or whatever his name, he's unpatriotic, he shouldn't do that, and, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and you don't have to be a Republican to say that stuff. You just have to be a subject.
never-before-seen video of Hillary Clinton inside the Walmart empire. She is probably one of the most investigative politicians in American history. And this morning you're going to see her in a way you've never seen her before, serving on the board of Walmart. ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross is here with details on this. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Robin. Although she makes no mention of it in her official biography, Hillary Clinton served for 6 years on the board of Walmart, the huge retailer criticized by many for its treatment of workers and its strident opposition to unions. Walmart's opposition to unions was led for decades by labor lawyer John Tate, who after his retirement proudly recalled at this company meeting in 2004 what he said was his favorite phrase.
Labor unions are nothing but blood-sucking parasites living off of the productive labor of people who work for a living.
Hillary Clinton was not present at this Walmart meeting, but Tate was relied on for years to keep unions out at Walmart, including during the 6 years from 1986 to 92, when Clinton was on the Walmart board and Tate was either an executive or a member of the board himself.
The emails. There were over 60,000 in total sent and received. About half were work-related and went to the State Department, and about half were personal that were not in any way related to my work.
When you speak to the public, you say, I turned over everything. That's, for the most part, a direct quote. When you talk to the public, you say, I turned over everything.
90 to 95% of my work-related emails were in the state system. If they wanted to see them, they would certainly have been able to do so. You know what?
That is maybe the 10th time you have cited that figure today.
It is.
And I have not heard anyone other than you ever cite that figure. Who told you that 90 to 95% of your emails were in the State Department system? Who told you that?
We learned that from the State Department in their analysis of the emails that were already on the system.
The Inspector General report found that less than 1% of State Department emails, record emails, were captured. So they give a number of less than 1%, and you give a number of 90%.
Interest in Libya in 2012.
The server contains personal communications from my husband and me.
Only time I got on the internet, I did 2 emails, and I ordered Christmas presents from a reservation. Otherwise, I found people said embarrassing things on emails. I didn't want to be one of them.
I mean, and how many angels dance on the head of a pin? I have really nothing to. I mean, how do you answer?
represented Wall Street as a senator from New York, and I went to Wall Street in December of 2007, before the big crash that we had, and I basically said, cut it out. Quit foreclosing on homes. Quit engaging in these kinds of speculative behaviors.
Now, who's exactly to blame for the housing crisis? I think there's plenty of blame to go around. Home buyers who paid extra fees to avoid documenting their income should have known they were getting in over their heads.
Of course, we have to deal with the problem that the banks are still too big to fail. We can never let the American taxpayer and middle-class families ever have to bail out the kind of speculative behavior that we saw. But we also have to worry about some of the other players. AIG, a big insurance company, Lehman Brothers, an investment bank. There's this whole area called shadow banking. That's where the experts tell me the next potential problem could come from. So I'm with both Senator Sanders and Governor O'Malley in putting a lot of attention. I represented New York, and I represented New York on 9/11. When we were attacked, where were we attacked? We were attacked in downtown Manhattan, where Wall Street is. I did spend a whole lot of time and effort helping them rebuild. That was good for New York, it was good for the economy, and it was a way to rebuke the terrorists who had attacked our country.
9/11 was bad.